the legendary character in American folklore known as the Steel Driving Man. John Henry was far from ordinary, but was a man of impeccable strength. At some point during Henry's time on the railroad, the steam-powered drill was invented. This drill would eventually eliminate the need for workers like Henry, so he was determined to prove that no machine could outwork him. And he was convinced that if he competed against this machine, that he would certainly prevail. Well, as some of you might know, John Henry did exactly that. He gave all that he had to compete against this machine and literally worked himself to death. John Henry defeated that machine, but it cost him his life. As a child, I remember being completely captivated by this amazing story of pride and perseverance. I mean, think about this for a moment. John Henry had an unwavering determination to succeed despite the insurmountable obstacles that stood before him. Now, I know what you're thinking. John Henry is just a harmless story of American folklore that has nothing to do with how people today live their lives. But I would beg to differ. I think this message of hard work is precisely the message that we promote today in a world where words like grit, perseverance, and resilience are used ever so casually without a deeper understanding of how these words impact the lives of people every day. As a mental health professional for several years and now a budding social scientist, I hear the word resilience used so frequently, I think people use it without considering its power. Now, typically when people use the word resilience, they're referring to an individual's ability to withstand difficulty and recover quickly, to successfully overcome systematic poverty, inadequate access to resources, and various other structural constraints. Let's consider for a moment the single mom struggling to provide for her 3 children, both financially and emotionally, despite working 60 hours a week at a low-paying job. Is she somehow able to pull it together for the sake of her children? As a society, we pat her on the back, and we say, she's demonstrating resilience. Or what about the young boy who goes to school every day hungry because he's one of 500,000 children in Georgia living in poor communities that lack access to healthy foods? Despite the impoverishment that impacts him daily, he still manages to get good grades, even outperforming several of his peers. As a society, we smile and we say, that kid, he has resilience. But what both of these individuals demonstrate are intrinsic desires to push forward, even under some potentially damaging conditions. I just wonder how differently their experiences might be if we stopped expecting people to adapt to adverse conditions. What if we thought more critically about how to alter adverse conditions? Efforts to keep going in the face of extreme and chronic adversity could actually make people more vulnerable to various risks, like psychological and physical health concerns. Expecting people to consistently bounce back without thinking about how they're being impacted, both mentally and physically, is irresponsible at best and potentially damaging at worst. A longtime scholar right here at the University of Georgia named Dr. Jean Brody has been studying African American families in rural Georgia for over 2 decades. Dr. Brody's work has focused specifically on understanding what helps these families succeed, despite experiencing poverty, racism, and other contextual factors. Recently, however, Dr. Brody's work has begun to explore the physical health of individuals who strive for success in the face of disadvantage. What he's found in his research is pretty startling. In studying a sample of young adult African Americans who came from very poor families, while in their adolescent years demonstrated high levels of resilience, in later life, these same individuals experienced high levels of wear and tear on their physical bodies, making them more prone to later develop disease and illness. So you might be wondering, what does all of this mean? Should we not encourage hard work? Isn't it a good thing that people have the ability to adapt to challenging circumstances? I would ask, at what cost do we want people to succeed? Am I really succeeding if my physical health is deteriorating because I'm working way harder than what I should have to? The unfortunate reality is that we live in a world where some people are born into privilege while others are born into disadvantage. And for the disadvantaged, sometimes simply striving to maintain can be harmful when you're faced with systematic hurdles that impede your progress. Now, don't misunderstand me. Resilience is not inherently negative, but if we continue to focus solely on the individual, expecting them to adapt to harmful conditions, without also thinking about how we must alter the harmful conditions, we have failed. Now, I know sometimes thinking about how to change the conditions that surround us feels like a daunting task. Seriously, it's like, where do we begin? I think it begins with each of us. It begins with us reconsidering the superficial thoughts we have about people whose lives we think could look drastically differently if they would simply work harder. Maybe we change the way we think about the single mom, sacrificing time with their children to ensure they have food and clothing. Or maybe it's the young boy who dismisses groans of hunger in his belly so that he can focus on his work. Maybe it's even thoughts you have about yourself. We begin by shifting our thoughts and literally rethinking resilience. Thank you.